In this video, Jordan Peterson explains how your mind and body meet each other.
So, this is for, say, an adult of about 35. What's one element of being a good person? Well, you might say being a good parent. It's not a necessary element, but it's one of the ones that would fit there. So what does it mean to be a good parent? Well, you could say, roughly speaking, that you have a good job and that you take care of your family. And then you might say, well, what does it mean to take care of your family? Now, one of the things I would like you to note is that these are abstractions, right? Good person, good parent, take care of your family. They're abstractions. The question is, what do they represent, or what are those abstractions made up of? Now, lots of the abstractions that we use are made up of descriptions of the world. So scientific categories are like that. But these aren't scientific categories. They're pragmatic categories. So they're actually made up of actions, not of objective facts. They're not made out of objective material at all. They're a whole different thing. Good person, good parent, take care of your family. Okay, what does it mean to take care of your family? Well, there's a bunch of things it means, but one of them might be you cook meals and you play with the baby. Okay, so then, well, what does it mean to complete a meal? Well, it looks like in this example, you're cooking corn. So what do you have to do? You have to cut it. You have to set the table. You have to do dishes. Now, you can imagine you could decompose those too. What do you have to do if you're doing the dishes? Well, you have to grip a dish. You have to move your hand in a twisting motion. You have to push this arm forward and turn on the tap. Okay, so what's cool about that is you can see where the mind, which is the part of us that's capable of abstract considerations, meets the body. Right? Because people are always wondering, well, how do you solve the mind-body problem? Well, this is one of the ways you solve it. You assume that abstract categories are actually abstract representations of patterns of action. And then you decompose them till you get to the action. It's like, how do you go underneath this? What's next on the hierarchy? Well, it doesn't matter because you're not conscious of it anyways. It's muscle movements, it's electrical information that your cells are sharing. It's completely irrelevant to you. It's not part of your consciousness. This is, you can do this. You can't move you can't move an identifiable finger muscle because you don't know which ones they are. So, one of the things Piaget would point out is that one of the characteristics of a baby when the baby's first born is that it can do these sorts of things. It comes equipped to do these sorts of things. Those are basic reflexes. Now, they're more basic than this, but a child can do this. It can stick out its tongue, which is really helpful because that means that it can mouth everything in its vicinity, which is exactly what a child does. And the reason it does that is because this little exploratory apparatus here is quite wired up. And so what the child assumes, so to speak, first is the world is a place to put in your mouth. And that's why babies are always putting everything they can in their mouth. Now, the tongue is absolutely covered with sensory and motor nerves, so it's an unbelievably facile exploratory tool. And so the child starts to extract out information about the world by using its oral reflexes to a large degree to begin with. Now, it can also move its eyes, although it's not really quite so good about that, and because its eyes cross a fair bit. It takes a while to get both of them coordinated. And it can hear things and so on. It's got a sense of touch, but it's equipped to start operating on the world at the highest resolution level of analysis. So we could say, think about it this way. As you move up a chain of abstractions, your representations get lower and lower in resolution. Understand? So for example, being a good person is a much lower resolution description than picking up a fork prior to setting it on the table, although picking up a fork is a micro element of being a good person. So that's a high resolution description. So another thing that you can know is that if you make a mistake, try to decompose the problem into high resolution representations. It's lazy not to. Not only that, it's insulting. So you come home and maybe your partner has agreed to make a meal and the thing is like scorched to death, and so you say, you are not a good person, you've never been a good person and you're never going to be a good person. It's like, well, they're not a good person insofar as they weren't able to make the meal, but you could start with a micro-analysis. It's like, why exactly did that burn? Since that's not the desired outcome. And then you can help the person disentangle the sequence and you can find out where the error occurred. Now maybe they were distracted by something else or whatever, but it's a very difficult analytic process. But I can tell you, if you're going to maintain an equilibrated state with yourself and with people around you, stay away from the low resolution abstractions when you're discussing something important. Go down to the micro level. You know, so here's an example that you might consider with regards to children as they develop. So the baby's laying on its crib, on its back, you know, and it's trying to get its act together, and it's got to organize its arms, and it's got to organize its legs, and it's got to figure out how to move them because it's just hitting itself in the head with its arms. Piaget would say, child will be laying there and go like this, and that'll sort of startle them. And then one of the things he'll do is try to do it again. So in that way, the child uses imitation of itself to start building up the basis of predictability. It's a bloody brilliant idea, you know. So that's part of the groundwork that the child lays to start understanding the world. It's going to be putting things in its mouth, and then it's going to notice similarities between the way something feels and how it feels when it's in the mouth, and it's going to notice that this motion is good for grabbing bottles, but it's also good for grabbing like teddy bears, so maybe teddy bears and bottles are in the same category to begin with, and the category is things you can grab and bring close to you, you know, which is a perfectly reasonable category, though it's not an objective category. And the child is chaining all these things together and developing more and more sophisticated abilities with its body. And at the same time, because it becomes more facile with its body, it can analyze the world at a higher and higher level of resolution. And so it's this circular process. Information in, development of tools, expansion of knowledge, information in, development of tools, expansion of knowledge. You sort of boot yourself up, fundamentally. And you do it from the bottom up. Now, let's say you've got a 3-year-old. This is a good example of how children differ at different developmental stages. So maybe you have a 15-year-old and you say, clean up your room. Now that is a low resolution representation. Now, when you use that low resolution representation on the 15-year-old, you assume that they know the following things. So we're going to put that aside for a moment. Now you're talking to a 3-year-old, and you're in their room, and the room is scattered with junk because they've been playing. And you say, now it's time to clean up your room. And then you leave, and then you come back in 20 minutes, and what's happened? No, the child's playing with some toy, and you say, you know, didn't you hear what I said? And the answer to that is, well, I heard it, but I didn't have any idea what you meant. And the reason that I didn't have any idea what you meant is because I don't have the microprocesses embodied in me. So then you take the 3-year-old and you say, do you see your bear? And the child goes, yes, because they've got seeing down. You point, they can see what you're pointing at. Great, that's a little micro routine. And then you say, could you go pick up that bear? And they know that one too, so then they'll go pick up the bear. And then you might point to a space on the shelf that's empty, and you could say, well, could you put that bear in that space? And they've got that too. So then you want to help them clean up the room, but you don't want to do it for them. Well, what do? You build up all the micro routines. And it's painstaking, eh? If you're a parent, you're just going to think, well, go play, I'll clean up the room, but then you'll be cleaning it up until the child is 15, because they won't develop the micro routines. So you might as well just start right off the bat and go through the painstaking process of building up the procedural knowledge as the ground for the abstract conceptions, because the next time you want the child to clean up the room, you could start by saying, pick up the toys on the floor and put them where there is space on the shelf. And maybe they've generalized across those, you know, more concrete instances of cleaning up so that they can use the abstract representation to govern themselves. So this also helps you figure out what it means for something to mean something. You might say, well, that's meaningful. What does that mean? Well, it means that, partly it means that you have the underlying structure so that you can take the abstract utterance and decompose it into actionable sequences in the world. Now, sometimes meaningful also means you could use the information to reconfigure the abstractions that you use to guide action in the world. So that's a bit more complicated, but you get the point. Now, part of the reason we can communicate, and this is quite interesting, and this is sort of in keeping with Piaget's ideas, is I kind of know what you know. Now, why do I know that? Well, it's not because I know you, because I don't. But it's because you're like me a lot. I mean, physiologically, we're, you know, not clones, but the similarities are obviously there, so I can assume that you have some relationship with your body that more or less parallels the relationship I have with my body, and then I can also assume that the environment you grew up in was sufficiently similar to the environment that I grew up in, so that the schema of actions and abstractions that constitutes your personality is similar enough to mine so that I can use abstractions. And you'll know what they mean. And so, it's a very complex and sophisticated theory of communication, right? Because it assumes that, well, where is the meaning in a word? Well, the word is embedded in a phrase, and the phrase is embedded in a sentence, and so on, so that's complicated. But the meaning is that I compress a whole sequence of action strategies and representational schemas into a phrase, and I toss it to you, and you decompose it. And then you've got the meaning. You know, and some like, you can't do something like, well, how do you play the piano? Well, you sit in front of it and move your hands up and down the keys. Right? That's too low resolution to be useful. But, especially if I know that you don't know how to play the piano, but if I can assume sufficient shared experience and shared biological commonality, then I can use high-level abstractions and we can exchange information.